He really needs no introduction. I think everybody knows Addison. He's one of the founders of the Long Island Spiritist Group Center. But to give a little background on Addison, throughout life's journey, there are many forks in the road, right? Yeah, Addison. For him, the moment he read the Spiritist book was one of the best, and he has not looked back since. A member of the Long Island Spiritist Doctrine group, he has accepted the great challenges and rewards of living the spiritual life in the material world, and it has been a source of inspiration and hope for the future. And his presentation is on No One Left Behind. So I'll let Addison take it away.
Thank you very much. All right, thank you very much. So today, before we start with my presentation, I wanted to touch on the 2016 elections because it actually has something to do with what we're talking about today. While as a charitable organization, we usually try to stay clear of talking politics, we feel it is our obligation to help play a part in ensuring that the laws of this country follow in the natural laws, that is, the moralistic laws of Jesus Christ. Right after the election results were started to come in around 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning, there was a spike in calls to the National Suicide Hotline. Between 1 and 2 a.m., 660 calls came in, double, triple the volume of a normal take. These calls increasing as the election results poured in. The only time they ever saw a similar jump once before was when actor Robin Williams died by suicide in 2014. The text crisis line saw 8 times normal volume of text between 12 a.m. and 1 a.m. on that Wednesday. And the Trevor Project, a crisis and suicide prevention hotline for LGBT youth, said its normal volume calls received double as a result of the election. The results of the election shocked a vast majority of Americans who thought that a lot of these old problems and deficiencies had been solved, or that we had progressed on, but they saw that it started to resurface, which in reality these problems never really have gone away. We as human beings have a tendency to focus on the immediate present moment, the right here, right now, rather than stepping back and looking at the bigger picture. We are on this planet for such a limited amount of time. 100 years would be an extraordinary life. But this is nothing in the multitudes of lives that we have already lived and the many more we still have to go through. As you may be aware, the majority of people who make up the Spiritist movement in the United States or actually make the movement move are immigrants. And many are brothers and sisters from the LGBT community. Therefore, we have many obstacles now facing us moving forward to spread the Spiritist philosophy. For the Spiritist worker, we must redouble our efforts, work even harder to keep our doors open, to continue to look for ways to bring the Spiritist principles to the United States, to take this as an opportunity to face adversity head on and to participate in our country's, whether you're here by birth or by adopted, spiritual growth. So, today's event, we hope to illuminate on the spiritual view of suicide, and this presentation will focus on just how the spirit world interacts with our world in regards to someone who has committed suicide, and how no one, whether in spirit or physical form, is truly left behind. There is a world beyond ours which sustains, supports, and rehabilitates us, and the sooner we become aware of this interchange, the sooner we will lead more balanced lives. Those who do not have an understanding of the spiritual ramifications of suicide may say the following things. They're finally at peace. They are free. The world was not good enough for them. Their suffering is finally over. And as you can see, Jeannie, you're finally free. And while that might appeal to us, right, it might appeal to us to think that he is finally free. He was a much beloved person, but that is often not the case in regards to suicide. Usually this is a coping mechanism to deal with this unspeakable act. Because in a majority of cases, a suicide does not leave a note, and even when they do, it does not answer sufficiently the questions of family members and friends it leaves behind with a sense of confusion and pain. A door closes to the material world, but Spiritism can open another door. It is through the countless communications with the spirits of those who committed suicide that we are able to piece together the situation that these spirits find themselves in. And it provides us with a cautionary tales of others' lives which have been led astray. Most world religions are ambivalent in regards to suicide without real answers as to what actually happens to the person in the afterlife, and more of a focus on what should be done with the person's mortal remains. All agree that life is sacred and comes from God, therefore are taking one's life a sin. Eastern religions agree that suicide to escape responsibilities is a huge mistake that will hamper the spirit's progress and put them a few lifetimes behind their spiritual liberation. While most religions have softened their stances, what happens to the suicide in the afterlife, there seems to be a variety of different viewpoints. The Christian Bible is oddly silent on this matter, leaving a multitude of perspectives and interpretations. So therefore, is one to turn to support? Where is one to turn to for support? Quite often, we turn to the medical community. But for anyone who has navigated the system before in regards to the mental health aspect, knows that there's a lot to be desired. Spiritism approaches mental health in three aspects: the physical state, the mental state, and the spiritual state. That is, making the physical body healthy, the psychological mind healthy, and the spirit itself healthy. Let's look briefly at the reality of what happens to the majority of people who commit suicide once they transition to the spirit world based on what Spiritism has taught us. Suicide is not a way out of physical suffering. Many times the spirit remains attached to the physical remains of the body. All suicides tend to form groups in the lower zones that are confined there for the time necessary to overcome their spiritual disorder. The spirit will have to once again undergo the same trials it thought it could avoid with its death, oftentimes under more harsh conditions and painful incarnations. The pain of watching loved ones as they deal with the loss and the aftermath that the suicide has caused. It is quite often that those who have a fear of being buried alive were in their last incarnations connected to their mortal remains. This has been corroborated by the many communications of spirits who were materialistically tied to the physical plane. The damage to the spirit through the suicide method will reverberate into the next physical body that the spirit assumes. This is done to help and aid the spirit to see the error of its way. It is our duty to battle back against adversity, but many fail along the pathways of the earthly existence. Entangled in the sufferings of life, the addictions, the lure of material pleasures, the lack of spiritual knowledge makes us weak and without faith or hope. We become susceptible to the lure of suicide. When we shorten our lives, we take away opportunities for spiritual growth. The very trials we try to avoid are actually what we need to make us grow as human beings. With the desperate act, we set ourselves back and must go through even more difficult trials in the future. There is a calling that we all feel to the spiritual life. Those who do not heed it will look to fill that void with things of a material nature. This in turn will leave them feeling unsatisfied and unhappy. It is not until you start turning away from the material world that you will have the ability to overcome the harshness of life's trials. We are never abandoned. God never abandons us. A glimmer of hope always remains for all those spirits who have found themselves confined in the purgatory regions of the spirit world due to the suicide. God is always present in the form of representatives or messengers called upon by a divine goodness to watch over and aid these poor spirits, even if they are unaware of it. The spiritual realms always open their arms and hearts to the spirits of suicides, helping to rehabilitate and repair some of the damage caused by the spirit's sudden and sad death. In all religions, we find that there is this central theme that you are not alone, and God never abandons anyone to eternal damnation. That very idea would negate the goodness of God. If there is someone who is considering suicide, this would be a good deterrent to killing himself, as the author describes the horrible detail they went through. Even for someone not affiliated with a religion, I would think that that person would not tempt the fates. That, from the Memoirs of a Suicide, is considered to be the most important book addressing suicide. In the book, the spirit Camilo Branco, who lived from 1825 to 1890, describes his experiences in the spirit world from the moment of his suicide to the long and difficult path back to redemption. This book entails invaluable instruction, demonstrating the greatness of the divine mercy toward repentant suicides and providing with the opportunity to understand the universe and life in its fullest dimensions. In the book, the secrets of the spirit world are revealed to the reader, the hierarchy of the spiritual realms. The work of the good spirits are on display in all of their majestic splendor. Because God never abandons his children, and Earth's emissaries never rest in regards to aiding the suffering spirits that remain imprisoned in the lower zones, a spirit colony was created to rescue and rehabilitate the spirits of suicides. The director and benefactor is no other than the very definition of love and charity, Mary of Nazareth. This is not to impress you by invoking the name of Mother Mary, but just to show you that the most highest among us opens her heart to the lowest of the low, the suicide. Also, how telling is it that God entrusted this same mission to the one he entrusted the birth of his son. The message is quite clear, that no one is abandoned or left behind, no matter what the circumstances of one's life or how far from perfection they are. Just to describe a little bit the Mary of Nazareth Hospital and what it's like, if you've never read this book, it's considered a correctional colony. It's a snowy fortress located above the lower zones in the spirit world. It has pretty much like a very earthly setup as far as it has a security department, admissions and registration, where when the spirit of the suicide is brought in, they'll be disclosing its earthly identity, the causes of suicide, the type of suicide committed, and the place of its earthly remains. The hospital sector, including mental and isolation wards, complete with nursing and doctor staff and hospital beds. So very much like a earthly psychiatric hospital in organization, but differing completely in the treatment. Rather than treating the physical body or the psychological mind, the spirit is what is treated. The rehabilitation process that happens in the spirit world in one of these places, like the hospital, the spirit hospital, it's a long and painful road that lies in store for the spirit of the suicide once they move past the imbalance of their spiritual body, which was damaged by the method of suicide. Spiritual re-education classes, tracing out their missteps while on the earthly plane, watching the effect of their absence in their loved ones' lives. This happens both in the spirit world and the physical plane within the Spirit Center. Observation of past life occurrences, understanding how the suffering they received in their former existence had a link to the preceding one. And finally, after much time and therapy, and depending on their circumstances, the choice to re-enter the physical realm and resume their trial, one they had thought they had escaped in their previous existence, or to stay longer and build their strength and volunteer to be of aid to others. Spirits, the long road to recovery. The physical damage to the material body is evident as a result of the method of suicide, but it has far-reaching consequences in the afterlife. The spiritual body is in turn damaged as well and requires therapy in the spirit world to overcome their immediate effects and subsequent future lives to rid itself of the disability completely. The long road to recovery starts in spiritual hospitals and happens in painfully long stages of rehabilitation in the physical world. To give a good quote from the suicide book in After the Storm by Joanna DeAngelis, she says that spirits will erase the woeful results in their wandering state, and after enduring indescribably difficult conditions, add to this their return to the earth under painful expiatory restrictions. Such is the results of those who betray the divine trust, namely, the physical body which was molded for the Spirit's glory and progress. Of course, let's also point out the amount of time all depends on the individual to how long these processes take. Their willingness to bring about a change in their behavior, to see how past mistakes have led them to where they are now, and to connect themselves to the higher power that is the source of inspiration and relief while they were on the earthly plane. To conclude, Allan Kardec sums up how Spiritism can aid in the stemming of the tide of suicide by showing through the example of those who have succumbed to that suicide is not only a wrong that violates moral law, a consideration of little importance to some individuals, but a reckless act that will bring no benefit, in fact, quite the contrary. This has been proven beyond a shadow of a doubt by the countless communications received regarding this matter. And I could almost say to you today, without a shadow of a doubt, that at least one of you sitting in this room, or perhaps all of you at some point, has decided to kill yourselves in a former existence. Perhaps that's even why you're here with us today. Certainly we can be certain that the spirits of suicides make up the majority of attendees here today. We are all looking for answers together. That's why we are here. It's important for us to use all perspectives, including the spiritual perspective, so we can arm ourselves with the best means of wiping out one of the most destructive forces on our planet, and the one that limits our spiritual potential as a whole. Thank you very much.